Hello, this is where I left my skirt last time. The waist of the front panel was wrinkled, so I tried to do something with it. I realized the two edges had different curves. Also, the top was too wide, so I trimmed it. Then I disassembled the panel. I had an extra panel of interfacing from my first mock-up. I used it to cut a second, shorter interfacing. I wasn't going to bone the waist, so I had to come up with something to give structure to it. I don't recommend using 2 layers of interfacing. It doesn't eliminate wrinkles but flattens my stomach, which is a happy result. I stitched the 2 interfacings together. Then I basted them on the main fabric. Finally, I basted the lining into place again. I basted the front gore into place. The waist seemed quite stiff. As I wanted a side pocket, I looked at the side seams to decide which one I could use. I chose the one that hardly curved. It was the one closer to the center front. A 9-gore skirt has 2x3 side panels. I unpicked the stitches in the seam. I used microscopic stitches, so it took ages to make an opening of 32 cm. You want to be able to put on or take off your skirt easily without tearing the seam. I couldn't get hooks and eyes because the haberdashery in town was closed, so I couldn't make a proper placket. I think I will have to use a combination of hooks and bars and snaps. I cut 2 rectangles for the placket. I usually use the salvage because I don't have to turn the edge. This salvage was rather ugly. I basted the strips in place. I decided to cut the one on the side closer to the front a bit more narrow. Plackets are difficult. It doesn't matter how many times I've sewn a placket, I always have to spend the whole day trying to figure them out. I did something I regret. I trimmed the interfacing on the right hand side of the placket, so I removed the layer that gave structure to the seam. I did it because I had too many layers of fabric in that seam. Still, it was a mistake. I quickly named the skirt a mock-up. That's the easiest way of fixing mistakes. The allowance of the lining curled up, creating a bulk, so I trimmed it too. I went awful crazy with the scissors on this project. I would have done this on any other skirt that doesn't need boning. Here I went overboard. I trimmed the lining and only the lining on the left hand side seam too. I decided that I would fold the very edge of the salvage. Fortunately, it didn't create any thickness. I sewed the 2 front seams. I cut off the excess. I left the excess in the waist. I got a very stiff seam. Then I realized I messed up the skirt when I cut the front. I made it too narrow at the stomach. I marked sure I had to let it out, but I couldn't let it out as much as I should have. I also undid the waist and made it less tight. It looked perfect, but I felt restricted in breathing and became panicky. I closed the placket by basting it. This helped me make the top of the waist symmetrical. I turned the allowance to the inside. You remember I cut the interfacing half an inch shorter than the other two layers. Because I hadn't adjusted the top edge on my mock-up, I ended up with a rather uneven waistline, so at places I had to turn more. This meant I had to turn the stiff interfacing as well. I secured it with fairly big stitches, which aren't visible in the dark fabric. I made a bias tape from the lining. I cut it at about a 30-degree angle instead of 45, so it had less stretch to it. I basted and stitched it a bit under the edge. I stitched down the edges of the placket too. I need to finish the placket and the hem, and I will see if I can find some nice vintage trim. Before I can finish the hem, I will have to let the skirt hang for a couple of days so that it can stretch as much as it wants. Even using a sewing machine, this skirt takes so much time to make. It is very heavy but doesn't give me a pain in the lower back, which walking skirts always do. Also, it puts my spine into a healthier position, which is a surprise benefit.